at the Fulton School, which is an AMS Montessori school in West County, over in St. Louis. I've also taught at Everett Elementary, which was a public school Montessori in Lincoln, Nebraska. So some of my Montessori background. I also have an extensive background in teaching traditional math, science, and STEM at more traditional schools as well. So this summer I became adolescent certified. I went through the AMI training in Ohio, and so I'm ready to get this program started. So our adolescent program will be on 2 different campuses. The first campus, we'll call it the Granite City campus, that's here. We will be remodeling the office space that we currently have. In that space, we will be putting a single-use bathroom, so the adolescents will have their own bathroom. There will be an area where they can have some lockers up in that space. And we also are looking into getting a fume hood for science experiments. And if we can get that ducted correctly, that will be up in that room as well. We also have a chicken coop that will be coming. We have a yard that we put in over last weekend. A bunch of parents came and volunteered. And then we have some garden beds that we will have here on this property. In the basement, the kitchen is being updated. And next weekend, we're going to be getting all new appliances so that the adolescents can do a lot of work in the kitchen. We'll also be sharing that with our upper elementary. The second campus is about 20 minutes from here. It's in Troy, Illinois. It's on the Red Pasofino farm, or excuse me, Red Fox Pasofino farm. There we will have 2 buildings to use. One of the buildings is a bunkhouse, so it has a mini kitchen, it has a bathroom, and then there's a small space where we could do lessons with the students. And the second building is more of a storage building. It's actually a pig pen, or was a pig pen over 100 years ago, I believe. But it's a nice space where we will be able to store things like bee suits and change of clothes and other things. And we can also, when the weather is nice, use that for lessons as well. Out on the farm, we will be placing some beehives. There's a nice area along some trails that we can do that with the students. There is an orchard there. Currently, it has not been harvested in years. I think they just don't have anyone out there to do it. So our adolescents will be taking care of the peach, apple, cherry, and I believe pear trees are all out there. And throughout the summer, we'll be meeting every once in a while to harvest whatever is ready for harvest and take care of. There are also a couple of ponds that are stocked. I don't remember what fish are in the ponds. But there are fish in there, and there are 2 different creeks. One runs dry in the summer. The other creek is Silver Creek, which I believe dumps into the Kaskaskia water basin. So we'll be using that for some pond studies. So we are going to have 2 full-time adolescent guides. I will be one of them, and my focus will be the science, math, and STEM area. We are looking for somebody to do full-time language arts. We are partnering with Dr. Haynes. Some of you may know Dr. Haynes. She runs the Montessori Training Center in St. Louis. And she also has the Montessori Lab School over in St. Louis. It's off of Washington. So this is her farm, and she is familiar with an adolescent program. She's actually an author on several papers on the Montessori adolescent program. A wonderful person to partner with. All the horse training in here will be with Pedro Vega. Pedro is the horse trainer out on the farm, and he does private lessons. He has 2 children of his own, and he's a wonderful individual. I think it will be nice to partner with him. And then the question is, how are we going to get to the farm? Metro East Montessori is looking at purchasing 1 or 2 vehicles to transport between campuses. What is an adolescent program? Our adolescent program will be 7th through 9th grade. In most traditional Montessori schools that have an adolescent program will go to 9th grade. Some shortcut it to 8th grade, but we will not. The curriculum is structured to support the emotional, spiritual, physical, moral, and intellectual development. As Montessorians, we feel that we need to address the whole child. We don't want to just hit their intellectual side, but we also want to help them develop their emotional spiritual side, and their moral development. So our ninth grade students, while they're part of our program, they act as the student managers for all the different activities. So somebody in ninth grade would be the student manager of bees. Somebody would be the student manager of the orchard, the equine aspect of the farm. So that's a nice thing. If you think about ninth graders that go to a traditional high school, they're at the bottom of the totem pole. They're not managers of very much. So that's a nice thing for those ninth graders to experience, to have that experience. Because we are focused, we know those students are eventually going to go to college, or that is the goal. They do take biology and government separate from those 7th and 8th grade students. And we are doing that to help with the college application process. The ninth graders are also given grades. And again, for the college transcripts and the college application process, ninth graders get grades. So what we do, or what we will do, our 7th graders are not graded. But in 8th grade, they'll start transitioning and start getting grades so they can kind of have a sense, and it's not a shock to them when they hit 9th grade and they get graded for assignments. And we still give them feedback. They're not just blindly going into an assignment. They'll get that feedback, but we really don't want the focus to be the grade. We want the focus to be the learning. So what kind of coursework do they do? We will have, if you compare an elementary program to a Montessori adolescent program, there's a lot more structure in the adolescent program. Those adolescents need more structure. So math, English, Spanish, those are all classes that are an hour long. Math is 5 days a week. English is 3 days a week, but they're also doing English in other classes and doing writing assignments, and I'll talk about that more in detail. Spanish is 3 hours formal instruction a week, and then they do immersion activities. So an immersion activity might be, perhaps they're making lunch, and the recipe is going to be in Spanish, and they're preparing Spanish food, and they're only speaking Spanish to each other as they prepare the meal. So that would be an immersion where they're practicing their conversation. Another immersion, they could be going off campus somewhere. Maybe they're volunteering at a Hispanic center and getting some of that language. We also will have some pen pals I have connections with individuals in Costa Rica and in Mexico, so we'll be setting up pen pals. So our students will be writing in Spanish to their pen pal. Their pen pal will write back in English, and they can work on grammar and things like that. So that would be an immersion for Spanish. Let's see, economics. Anyone who has the adolescent background in Montessori know we call it a microeconomy. So the students run their own business, and they have economics lessons through that. I'll touch on that a little bit more. They also will have technology. We will take a week where we focus on technology projects. Off on the table back here, there's an Arduino. If you're familiar, you can plug an Arduino into your computer and do coding. Do Scratch as an easier code. You could do other computer codes, and then the kids can make little robots or make motors spin, or hit the pressure sensor or something like that. So that would be like a technology thing that they would do. They'll also learn the basics of Excel and PowerPoint and get their keyboarding in and so forth. So those are some of the kind of things that they might do in technology. Also, I have access to a 3D printer, so we could do some projects and do a 3D printer as well. So that's kind of technology. Humanities is kind of the equivalent to history. I'll hit on that more in detail. And science occupations is equivalent to science. I'll discuss that more in detail. We also have creative expressions, physical expressions, cooking. They'll be preparing lunch quite often. And we have an advisory where you meet with either me or the other full-time adolescent teacher. The advisory is more like a 15-minute check-in. There are different topics they can discuss. 9th grade, they'll start talking about transitioning onto a high school, stuff like that. They have weekly seminars, and also they do chores. So the adolescents, they muck the stalls. So the two ladies in the picture are doing. They will also be scrubbing their own toilet. They have their own bathroom. They will be expected to take care of everything themselves. So that's so the self and creative expressions, that's a class that they will have once a week. It's about 2 or 3 hours in length. And usually we'll probably do that on Wednesdays. And in that, students are going to be given choice, what kind of music or creative language, woodworking, art, they might be doing pottery, they might be doing sewing, but they'll be given some sort of choice what they're going to do. Typically that self-expression class will probably be about a month. It could be 2 months. It really depends what they're doing. So it changes throughout the semester. And the goal is to have 2 of those running concurrently so the kids can have choice and buy in on what they're choosing to do. It's really important to have a self and creative expressions class for adolescents. They really need that quiet time to reflect. They're in a position or a time of their life where they're transitioning from childhood. They're not kids anymore. They're not yet adults. And they're really working on trying to figure out who they are. And it's important not to cut that out of the curriculum. Some schools are cutting art and music out because of budget cuts, but that's something that I feel is very important. Physical expression. Physical expression would be similar to PE. If you think back to junior high or high school PE, you have, classroom full of kids. Half of them are not interested in whatever it is they're doing. Basketball. You have a group over here chatting because they aren't really into basketball. So physical expression is a little bit different. There's a connection with nature. There's a connection with the environment and with doing work. So it can be something like they're chopping wood. And again, they're choosing what they want to do. So physical activity like that. They may be digging. They may be doing dance or kayaking, ropes courses. I have a variety of things that are potential possibilities for next year. But again, it's choice. You get 2 different options. And hopefully that way students have more buy-in and they want to participate more. And they'll still have, I know already the boys, a couple of them are interested in soccer. So I'm sure they'll try to arrange some sort of mini soccer game if that's what they want to do. So when we look at language, we have like what you would think of as a typical English class. We will run what's called a Socratic seminar. And if you're familiar with that, or if you're not familiar with that, basically students will read a passage, maybe they'll read a poem, or they'll have a couple of chapters to read out of a book, or whatever, they'll have some sort of reading assignment. And then they'll prepare some evaluative questions over that reading assignment. They'll bring those evaluative questions to the group, and then they'll go around asking and answering the questions. Sometimes it's harder to come up with an evaluative question over what you just read than it is to just read it. So it's kind of really helps bring out the higher order thinking skills. Language, our English class will look at literature and a performance. So for example, maybe they will read some Shakespeare, maybe Romeo and Juliet, and then they'll perform Romeo and Juliet for a performance play in probably sometime in the winter. I think I scheduled January would be a good time for that. The language also has interdisciplinary writing support. So I'll talk about science occupations and humanities in the next couple of slides. But those 2 classes, the kids will be writing large papers. They'll be writing argumentative essays. They'll be writing research papers. And instead of just handling that in science occupations, they will be working with the language arts teacher on how to write a good, put their thoughts on paper, how to properly document, how to properly cite, and so forth. So that's going to be a nice marriage. A lot of times schools don't do that. The English teacher does English, the science teacher does science. So that's one thing we're looking at. Spanish, focus oral and written communication. And I mentioned a little bit about the weekly immersion, how students will be doing some sort of activity where they are not given a script to just speak in Spanish back and forth. mathematics. So we will have a marriage between a textbook curriculum and the Montessori materials. I know some adolescent programs go with only textbooks, others go with only the Montessori materials. I like to marry the two together. This is my style. We will offer pre-algebra, algebra, geometry, all the way on up to pre-calculus. Not everyone's going to take pre-calculus. I mean, let's be fair, that's not going to happen. But it can if a student really is highly motivated and they want to work over the summer and whatever. I'm not going to slow them down just because it's not convenient for me. So right now we have a couple of students that are in 6th grade that expressed interest to start pre-algebra. So they are starting this week. And that was out of their interest. So anyways, mathematics is going to be more student-centered. It's mastery-based, so I will give the kids a portfolio. It will have a list of the different things they need to accomplish to demonstrate that they understand a concept, and they need to demonstrate that they have mastered that concept before they can move on. So it's not like they're just taking a test, oh, you got a 70, great, time to start chapter 2. They're not going to start chapter 2 until they really understand chapter 1. Or whatever that particular concept is. So that's another difference. Traditional schools, you're on a time schedule. You go to the next chapter because it's time, not because the kids are ready. There are also multiple modes of assessing students. So exams, the reality is they're going to have to take exams. So they will get exams. I want to prepare them for the ACT or SAT, so they will get exam questions in the similar manner that they would see on those two standardized tests, just for practice. I don't feel it necessarily measures, that's a whole other issue, but exams don't always measure what students understand. Rarely do they measure that. They also have projects, and they'll do a lot of data analysis. You had a chance to look, I had a bunch of these things out on the table. I used to be a science advocate for Texas Instruments, so I have tons of the stuff. But kids can do data analysis, and it's a nice measure, nice marriage between science and math. So if somebody is in pre-algebra, they might look at logarithms. Well, that doesn't mean much to them until they start using it. So this is a pH probe. They can go do different science experiments, look at the pH scale, which happens to be the negative log, the concentration of hypochlorite. It uses a logarithm. So we have a bunch of different probes that we will be using. There are motion sensors. Motion sensors are great because they can do positive and negative slope. If I move away, what is the slope? If I move toward you, what is the slope of that line? A lot of different functions. Carbon dioxide detectors. You can look at concentrations, which is the area under a curve, which then goes on to area under a curve. You're looking at integrals and integration, which calculus, I guess. Okay, you might not do that. So anyways, that's data analysis. Socratic seminars I kind of mentioned. They will do that. They'll be given a problem set, and all the kids will work together on solving that problem set using the Socratic seminar. So our program, there'll be a kind of heavy emphasis on STEM, on science, technology, engineering, and math, and kind of gave some examples on data collection. That's going to be kind of something that we will be doing a lot of. With math, they also will be doing their microeconomy, which is where they'll get some economics in. We'll look at how to get a loan. They want money to pay for the chicken food. You know, they're going to have to get a loan for that, and that's a nice way to look at interest rates. And they can look at rate of return on their investment and so forth, or loss. Which is probably going to be a loss. Anyways, so let's take a look at the afternoon. So most of what I described is in the morning, or that big chunk of time on Wednesday for creative and physical expression. So the afternoons will be filled with either science occupation or humanities, and that's a big chunk of time. We're looking at 2.5 to 3 hours a day, 4 days a week. For now, I guess it's 3 days a week. It's, well, anyway, it adds up to 10 hours. I do know math. Anyways, schedule's kind of a little goofy at times. students will either be doing a science occupation or they will be doing a humanities. It's not something they do concurrently. So it's a two weeks of science occupations, then they switch to 2 weeks of humanities, and they go back to 2 weeks of science occupation. And there's a good reason for that. If they need to order supplies for science, or maybe they need bee suits or something, we don't want them wasting time while those things come in. So they switch over to doing humanities for a little bit. And they still might be reading for science. They might be writing on the weekends. They might be doing some things so they don't totally forget what they're working on. So it says in the afternoon work cycle. And Montessori principle, it's important to tie the hand to the mind. So we don't just learn out of textbooks. We have to do physically or doing something with our hands, with our bodies. So they're out making measurements. They're out, looking at the beehive, seeing how the queen is doing. It's physical. Here's an example. A student was collecting water in one of the ponds. All of these pictures, by the way, I think we should have mentioned that. Most of these pictures are taken at the farm where our classes will be, the Pasofino farm. And the rest of the pictures were here staged in the soon-to-be classroom. So science occupations, humanities, everything is integrated. So if they're doing science, they're graphing, they're doing analysis, they're doing, looking at, is this a linear function? What kind of, is this a regression? What is the equation for this, etc. And then the language, in science, they'll have to write. So they'll be getting support with their writing with the language arts teacher or English teacher. Just some examples. 2 students trying to load a gel. This is what they will do next year. So another student looking at a water sample under the microscope. He found several different little creatures in the water. And then another student, okay, disclaimer, he's not actually writing code, he is pretending. But next year he will be writing. So he is, we could probably edit that out of the video, right? So what is some examples of the science occupations? First, we don't call it science in Montessori because science doesn't really have a real-world application. Science is very limited, and most Montessorians will call this class occupations. I don't want to call it occupations because I think it should be called science occupations. That is why. I won't go into those details. There are other people that call it that too. So anyways, some examples of these classes: beekeeping. We're not just going to go out and play with bees and feed them. We're looking at the genetics of the bees. The worker bees are haploid. They don't have all the chromosomes that a queen bee does. So that's a beautiful way to look at how genetics works. Look at DNA replication. Look at mitosis and meiosis. Equine studies. So they're your horses. So what's neat about the Pasofino horse, I didn't know much about horses. I found out they have a unique mutation. They come from a lineage of a horse that has a mutation that prevents them from running. They skip, kind of. So I love that example because now I can talk to my students about genetic mutations and look how this horse skips when it runs, or, well, it doesn't run. It's a mutation in the way that the brain processes through the spinal cord. So now I can talk about neurology with them, and it's very real to them. They can feel it when they're riding on the horse, so they can see it. Organic farming. The goal is to have some produce. The produce we hope to sell to a restaurant, to sell at markets. The students will be running that. That's part of their microeconomy, their business. But we can look at organic farming. We can also go over to Monsanto and look at what is a GMO. There's a nice hit with genetics. There's a nice hit with, organic farming versus using pesticides. Which one gives you a greater yield? Which one is bad for the environment? So you've got a lot more than just science there. You have other economic concerns and environmental concerns. Natural resources, we're looking at things like our water resources. We will be doing sampling from Riverwatch. We will report our data to the IDNR, the Illinois Department of Natural Resources. So we will be looking at, is this stream clean? You would think it's clean, but it probably isn't. Why isn't it clean? Look at the farms around. Are they using pesticides? So we'll be looking at those things. Renewable energy is another one. I'll go into more detail with an example on that. And then structures, that's building things. Is this going to fall? What's the act of measuring things? How do you get a 45-degree angle cut on this wood so that when you miter it together, it won't mismatch? So here's a detailed, and my disclaimer, this has too many words on the slide, and I realize that. And I just wanted to list so you can have an idea of what would be included. So next year, we will do a study on renewable energy. We received a grant and got a bunch of equipment to build mini wind turbines. The kids are going to be looking at wind energy and solar energy. And the question for them to solve, there's always a problem to solve, the question is which one of those sources of renewable energy would be best for our property. They have to go into all the research for that to answer that question. And then they're going to write a grant to try to get the money to get one of those installed on our property. Does that mean we'll get the grant? No, but I think there's a really good chance. IDNR has a grant for schools. So they're going to be writing like a 15-page grant. Can you imagine? That's a big chore for a 7th grader. But it's real work, and it's something they're going to be involved in. And they're going to also have support from the language arts teacher in writing. So that's something that they can put together. So in order to write this grant, they're going to have to do experiments. They're going to build, better than I did, a miniature wind turbine. This thing will plug into the calculators, and they can take measurements on voltage, current. They'll be looking at resistance, variable load. So all of these sciencey words they'll be doing with this, looking at their graphs, making determinations. Is a wind turbine going to generate electricity for us in this area? They'll also be doing solar panel research. Is this a good location for solar panels? Where would we put it? Are we going to have to go to the Pontoon Beach mayor and get a variance? Yes. How do you do that? What do you wear? Do you wear flip-flops, or do you wear a suit and tie? So those are, it's more than science. It's encompassing, much more. And if they do it wrong, it will fall apart. The correction of air. So that's just an example of one of the science occupations that the kids will be doing next year. So humanities. Humanities is going to be integration, again, of history. It's more than history. It's history and science, philosophy, psychology. You're getting your literature in there. And also humanistic studies. So we'll look at what does the civilization look like before that time period, and what did it look like after that time period. What scientific discoveries happened to make changes. The westward expansion, for example. I'm not the humanities expert. That's who we're hiring, but I can do westward expansion. So we'll look at, a steam engine. That made a big difference. Getting the train going from east to west coast made a difference on our westward expansion. So you also kind of incorporate a little bit of science in there. Again, you're also reading. You're also writing a report of some sort. You're presenting to your peers at the end of that study, and so forth. It's not just, I think, traditional history classes. We're studying American history. We'll hit all the wars. It's more than just studying the wars. It's studying the social justice. How have people fought? How have people reacted to whatever situation? This, by the way, is the Big Pen. And it is, I believe, one of the original buildings on the property of that farm when it was settled, I believe, by Germans out where they are in Troy. So the microeconomy, I mentioned a little bit. It is going to be a student-run business. The students will produce something, they will market it and sell it. And from that, they gain the experience of making adult-like decisions within a scaffold. So they will make mistakes, and those mistakes will be evident. they didn't harvest, right? They didn't call somebody on time to schedule, the market booth or whatever. But they need to experience, when there's a failure, they need to have that experience to learn from it. It also gives students the opportunity for valorization, which is a Montessori term. Basically, you are putting in an effort, and other people, appreciate that effort. And that really does a lot for your self-esteem. You don't need to be told, good job. You need to be able to sit back and watch somebody enjoy the meal you just prepared. That does more for you. And does more for the adolescents. Different examples, they might maintain beehives, collect honey. I mentioned the gardens and the orchard. They will can collect produce from the orchard and sell it. Baskets, sweaters, pottery. They might do woodworking. I know some Montessori schools do a lot of woodworking. They make chopping boards or cutting boards, or wooden spoons. Whatever, really, it's what the kids are interested in, and what actually sells. That they might make stuff and you're going to be the only one buying it, which is not the goal. Anyways, I want to end kind of with this quote from Dr. Montessori. She says, "Work on the land is an introduction to both nature and civilization, and it gives a limitless field for scientific and historic studies. There's an opportunity to learn both academically and through actual experience what are the elements of social life.